In this episode, Roman relics buried under an Egyptian obelisk, city buses that brought down a 150-year-old political machine, and many more of New York's untold stories. Hi, and welcome to Viewmaster Travels. I'm Dave, and it's my goal to visit all the locations from my vintage Viewmaster reels and see what's there today. This time it's reel 157, New York City. This was my first visit to the city, and of all the topics I've covered, I don't think I've done one with as many interesting historical facts as this one. So this video just covers a few of the most interesting things I found while visiting these 7 famous landmarks. The first Viewmaster picture we were trying to find was somewhere in Central Park, and since we'd never been there, figuring out where this picture was my first challenge. I figured I could probably identify some of these old buildings in the picture, so I started looking around the park on maps until I found this building with the triangular roof and 2 chimneys. This is 150 Central Park South, Hampshire House, originally the brainchild of Eugene E. Lignante, a talented violinist who wanted to get into real estate, investing heavily in his dream project in 1925. The Great Depression ended his plans, though, and those of many others, as dozens of banks and investors went bankrupt trying to complete this building. It wasn't finished until 1937. Given that landmark, this must be the pond, and from the angle, the woman is sitting on the eastern side of it. We were staying in Flushing, so we took the 7 train across town to Queensboro Plaza, switched to the N train, and went on to 59th and 5th. A short walk north from there, and we were in Central Park. It was an absolutely beautiful spring day, and after a quick walk around the pond, we found the same view. Here's what we saw. Central Park. It's changed quite a bit. Hampshire House is still there, now obscured by the taller trees, and there are several new skyscrapers, the most expensive apartments in the world, with some selling for over $200 million. Central Park, the first major landscaped park in the U.S., was built around a midtown water reservoir, and when we took a carriage ride around, the driver said it was the second largest park in America. Turns out that's not true. It's only the 6th largest park in the city, and not even in the top 100 for the US. So that wasn't right at all. And no, this isn't the fountain from Friends, that's in Hollywood. So I'm not trusting anything else he said, especially about the squirrels. There are many fascinating true facts about Central Park, though. The cost to build the park was more than the US paid to buy Alaska. It's listed as its own census-designated place. In 2016, the park had an official population of 5 people. The pond we were walking around was originally a swamp, and for a little while served as an ice rink. There are 36 ornamental bridges, each unique, and it's surrounded by 18 named gates. My favorite fact is the answer to a question from my New York World's Fair video. The park contains the oldest human-made structure in New York City, Cleopatra's Needle, on display behind the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was one of 4 obelisks made in 1450 BC by Pharaoh Thutmose III for the Temple of Ra in Heliopolis, Egypt. It stood there until 525 BC, when it was toppled during the Persian invasion of the area. The Romans found it and its one remaining twin in 12 BC and moved them both to Alexandria, where it stood near the legendary Pharos lighthouse, the 7th wonder of the world. This was centuries before we'd encounter the world's second most well-known lighthouse right here in New York City. Can you guess which one? Its twin fell down in 1303, but this one remained standing and got the name Cleopatra's Needle. In 1819, Egypt gifted the fallen obelisk to England, but it took them 59 years to make arrangements and move it to London. In 1877, the remaining obelisk was gifted to the United States, thinking the U.S. would probably never get around to taking it. However, U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander Henry Honeychurch Gorringe was put in charge of retrieving it, and he did the whole thing in just 4 years. I read Gorringe's entire journal of moving the needle, and it's a wild ride, but here's the best bit. He had to invent entire techniques to lift, rotate, and transport the needle around Alexandria into an old postal delivery barge they had purchased. Then they deconstructed the Roman pedestal the needle had been standing on, intending to rebuild it in Central Park. Inside the pedestal, they made an amazing discovery. Hidden beneath the stonework, they found a polished cube, a rough square block, and a stone with snake figures carved on it. These symbolic blocks could have only been hidden by the Romans in 12 BC. Gorringe suspected these were ancient Masonic symbols, the square and ashlar and the master's mark, and what he found next confirmed his suspicions. Next to these stones, carefully preserved, was an ancient Roman iron trowel and lead plummet, tools of the Mason, from ancient Roman times. This proved the Freemasons' ancient origins. Keep in mind, Gorringe was a Mason, and he had fellow brothers confirm his findings. Not everyone agreed with his conclusions, though, and from what I can find, the artifacts were soon stolen, and their whereabouts today is a mystery. The needle made its way across the Atlantic without much issue, and then was moved on handmade tracks across town to Central Park, where it was stood up next to the Met. And it's not just ancient history, it's the heaviest single object ever intentionally placed in New York City. We walked back to the station and headed downtown. Oh crap, we got on the wrong side. Hang on. We'll get out at the next stop and cross over. Okay, we headed downtown to Rockefeller Center. This view was blocked by some Easter decorations. Here's a better view. This picture of Rockefeller Center is taken from the Channel Gardens, a pedestrian street running from Fifth Avenue to Rockefeller Plaza. It's lined with 6 small pools containing fountainheads representing leadership, will, thought, imagination, energy, and alertness. At the end, we found the famous view of the plaza and the Prometheus statue, and everything was decorated for Easter. The plaza is the center of Rockefeller Center, which is actually 19 different buildings, including Radio City Music Hall and 30 Rock, the headquarters of NBC. This area was originally a forest until 1804, when it was purchased by Dr. David Hossack, who converted the land into the Elgin Botanic Garden. Incidentally, Hossack was the doctor who attended the duel between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr and tried to treat Hamilton's mortal wounds. Hossack couldn't keep the gardens alive either, and in 1814 his land was given to Columbia University, who didn't actually want it and didn't use it for much until the 1900s when they started to lease out the land to real estate developers. It's at this point John D. Rockefeller got involved. He leased the land in order to build a new opera house. But like with everything else, the Great Depression changed his plans. The Metropolitan Opera Company backed out since they realized they couldn't afford the rent. Rockefeller was too invested to stop, though, and took out personal loans so that he could continue building, initiating the largest private construction project ever. He employed 40,000 people during the Depression, placed the largest orders for both Indiana limestone and structural steel in American history, and created 14 new buildings in the city. The famous picture of workers eating lunch on a steel beam high above New York was taken during the construction of 30 Rock as a publicity stunt to help attract tenants. The sunken plaza is surrounded by a maze of shops and restaurants. But so few people went down into the plaza that Rockefeller decided to add an ice rink in the winter as an attraction. The rink is still an annual winter tradition. We wandered through the plaza shops and stopped for New York pizza, although it ended up being Detroit pizza, which was really good. Then we got back onto the F train and went one stop to try and find our next destination. Times Square. Times Square has always been confusing to me. Looking at the map, there isn't a square there. There's actually two triangles. One at the intersection of Broadway, 7th Avenue, and 42nd Street, that's Times Square. The upper triangle is actually Father Duffy Square. We got off the train at Bryant Park and walked 44th Street to take our picture. It was way crowded, and we couldn't really even stop because of the flow of people, and once we were there, it was still confusing which direction matched the old Viewmaster picture. Needless to say, everything's changed. During the American Revolution, this was private farmland. In 1799, it was purchased by John Jacob Astor, and you can see his name lit up in the picture. Astor was the first multi-millionaire in the United States, making his money mostly in the fur trade. The Astor in the picture, though, is the Astor Hotel, built in 1905 for the Astor family as the successor to their Waldorf Astoria Hotel. It was built on what was then known as Longacre Square, which was the center of New York's carriage building trade. The New York Times had just moved offices to the square the year before, and they convinced the mayor to build a subway station there and rename the area Times Square in their honor. The Astor had a famous rooftop garden, and you can see the advertisement for it in the picture. Across the street is the Bond clothing store, built in 1948, with its massive neon signs, waterfalls, and glowing statues. It was the largest retailer of men's clothing at the time. This was the first zipper sign. 20,000 light bulbs created scrolling text that gave the news of Broadway. The Astor was demolished in 1967 and Bond closed in 1977, but clues to both remain. Many places in New York still bear Astor's name, including Astor Place Station, which is decorated with beavers, since Astor made his money in the fur trade. Also, we found an Italian restaurant named Bond 45, which was the restaurant that used to be inside the Bond clothing store, but moved a block away when the store closed, so we ate lunch there. Public Library. It was a quick walk past Bryant Park to the main branch of the New York Public Library to get this shot from Fifth Avenue. Like Central Park, this site used to be a water reservoir, the Croton Reservoir, which was a giant above-ground holding tank that kind of looked like a castle. The reservoir was demolished in the 1890s, just as plans to consolidate the Astor and Lenox libraries into a single New York public library were forming. It took 8 years to construct and a full year to transfer all the books into the new building, which opened to the public in 1911. There are two lions in front. The left-hand one is way over here, so it didn't fit in the Viewmaster picture. The lions were originally named Leo Astor and Leo Lenox. The joke is that you can sit on the steps and read between the lions. The lions were sculpted by the Piccirilli brothers, whose work comes up a lot in these videos. They did the statue of Abraham Lincoln in DC, and the Washington Square Arch we'll see a little later. The library is very beautiful inside, and there were several exhibits of rare items on display. But we did get quite lost walking around, and I'm not sure we saw it all. Plus, the famous main reading room wasn't open to the public. Bryant Park behind the library had a market going on, so we wandered through those vendors for a while. This was the site of New York's Crystal Palace that held the 1853 New York exhibition. It was based on the famous London Crystal Palace, which was the site of the 1851 London exhibition. Both the New York and London Crystal Palaces burned down. Bryant Park was rebuilt in the mid-80s, partly because the library needed to expand its book storage. 84 miles of book stacks were constructed underground, and the park was rebuilt on top. As pleasant as the park was, we had to move on. Back to the F train to head to 4th Street. Oh, hang on, that was an express. We'll have to switch back. There we go. Out at 4th Street and 2 blocks walk finds our next destination. Washington Square. Washington Square Park is in the Greenwich Village neighborhood, and we could tell the city vibe had entirely changed from where we'd been. The arch is easy to find as it dominates the area. It marks the southern end of Fifth Avenue, intended to commemorate George Washington's inauguration centennial in 1889, but it wasn't actually completed until 1895. The area used to be marshy fields with a creek running through the middle. The west side of the creek became Dutch farmland for the settlement of New Amsterdam, which was quite a ways to the south. In 1787, the land east of the creek was turned into a potter's field, where they'd bury people cheaply. And by 1825, there were remains of over 20,000 people buried here. It does seem that burial remains are found rather frequently. Some were found when building the arch, and it was fairly common to come upon graves when digging in the area. But there's one thing in the picture that made me very curious. It's this bus driving under the arch. This is the classic yellow Fifth Avenue Coach Company double-decker bus that would take you up and down Fifth Avenue for a dime. They used this style of bus until 1953. What struck me, though, is that when we were there, you obviously couldn't drive under the arch, so when did that change? Answering that question uncovered the story of an underdog's fight to bring down a corrupt New York City government. Since the 30s, traffic in Washington Square had been a contentious issue. A plan to extend Fifth Avenue through the park had been defeated already, and now all the traffic that remained was from a city bus turnaround loop that went under the arch and around the fountain. Local activist Carol Greitzer felt the bus traffic was a safety hazard and wanted them out of the park. She helped form a grassroots organization, the Village Independent Democrats, to do so, eventually running for political office against incumbent Carmine DeSapio, boss of Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall was a fraternal order that had controlled Manhattan politics since the mid-1800s. Described as being efficient but corrupt, they were known for trading favors for votes. Greitzer and running mate Jim Lanigan made the bus turnaround a core part of their campaign to rebuild the city and give it back to the people, and the voters agreed. DeSapio lost the election, losing the district leadership of Greenwich Village, a post he'd held for the prior 20 years. Tammany Hall never regained this lost political ground and by 1967 had entirely ceased to exist. A 150-year-old political machine had been dismantled. Who knew such a story lay behind this vintage Viewmaster picture? It's back over to the A train downtown to Fulton Street, and then a few blocks walk to Wall Street and Trinity Church. This area of the city is entirely different from what we've seen so far. It's windy and cramped, and it's crazy to see the cars and people squeezing through the street in the old picture. This is Wall Street, the original northern boundary of New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam was a Dutch settlement that filled the southern end of Manhattan Island, protected on 3 sides by water and a Great Wall on the 4th. By 1700, New Amsterdam was British, renamed New York, and had outgrown its wall, so it was removed, leaving just a street in its place, aptly named Wall Street. The road through the wall's gate became Broadway, following a Native American hunting trail all the way across Manhattan. Stones from the original wall were used to make New York's second city hall in this exact spot, used for a while as the nation's first capital. It was the site of George Washington's first inauguration. That building was demolished in 1812, and the original bricks from the wall were likely used for other buildings. Maybe some of the original stones from the Wall Street Wall are still hidden in the foundations of nearby buildings. Trinity Church stands on the site of the original gate through the fortress wall, constructed by the Church of England in 1698, although the church that's there today is the third on the site, built in 1839. Its cemetery is the oldest in town, and is where Alexander Hamilton was buried after Dr. Hassett couldn't save him. We've got time for one more landmark, the world's second most well-known lighthouse. Statue of Liberty. After dodging people trying to sell us tour packages, we hopped on the ferry at Battery Park, kinda late in the day, and sailed to Liberty Island. Problem was, this was the last ferry that would continue on to Ellis Island, which we also wanted to see, so we had to jump off the ferry and run to catch this picture to get right back on the boat before it left. There's a lot to say about the Statue of Liberty, a gift from the French. As long as the US built a pedestal to put it on, it was delivered in pieces in 1885 and assembled on site. The head and torch sections were completed much earlier, and they'd been on display at various exhibitions and World's Fairs already, where you could pay to look out from the torch's balcony. A great parade was held when the completed statue was dedicated, and as that parade went down Wall Street, the brokers opened their windows and threw the little strips of paper from their ticker tape machines over the crowd, spontaneously creating the world's first ticker tape parade. What I found most interesting, though, was that the statue was turned into a rather useless lighthouse. I mean, it wasn't designed to be one, but when the designers realized they'd made a statue of a woman standing in the harbor holding a torch up high, guiding people to America, they realized it just had to be a lighthouse. In 1886, they hired a lighthouse keeper, Albert E. Littlefield, who'd had experience with electricity, which was new at the time, and came up with a makeshift way to shine lights from the torch. It was the tallest lighthouse in the US and the first powered by electricity, but useless as a navigational aid since you couldn't even see it from Manhattan just 8 miles away. They said it was more like a glowworm than a beacon. In 1902, it was decommissioned, so Littlefield was the first and last keeper of the Statue of Liberty Lighthouse. We continued on to Ellis Island and then back to Manhattan, and did so much more on our trip to New York that I could make a whole series of videos about it. There was just so much to see and so much interesting history to cover, but there just isn't time for it all. This trip was amazing, but one thing stood out most of all. Of all my Viewmaster travels, the people of New York were the kindest and most helpful we've ever met. Thanks to everyone who helped us navigate the subway. Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching.